Almost 700 years ago, Switzerland was not a country at all, but many small cantons or counties, each run by a governor from Austria. It was a time of great oppression, and out of that cruel era, there comes a legendary figure whose courage united the Swiss for the first time. This Swiss hero came to symbolize the fight for freedom for other nations apart from Switzerland. And it was this story which inspired the Italian composer Gioacchino Rossini to write one of his finest operas, and perhaps his best-known overture. This is the story of William Tell. In the center of what is now Switzerland, there were three cantons, called Schweiz, Nidwalden, and Uri, known as the Forest Cantons. Life was hard, but made all the harder by ruthless landlords who forced the peasants to work the land without pay. So the peasants banded together to survive the harsh alpine winters and became a close-knit community which struggled to get more and more freedom. As they threw off the burdens of forced labor and payment in kind, so the peasants of these forest cantons began to prosper and progress. But for these Swiss people, things were about to take a turn for the worse. In the year 1298, Albert, the Austrian emperor, took up the German crown, and with it the three cantons. Now, the one thing which Albert I wouldn't tolerate within his empire was strength anywhere but in his own hands. So he planned the destruction of the independence of Uri, Schweiz, and Nidwalden. In the three cantons, unaware of the Austrian emperor's plot, the harvest was coming to an end, and the peasants gave thanks and relaxed into the season of festivals. One town in particular, a town called Berglen, always drew bigger crowds than the others, as people flocked from miles around to see Berglen's famous archer shoot in the competitions. His name was William Tell, a tall, dark, powerful but gentle man, whose arrow in the middle of the bullseye was, often as not, split in two by his next arrow. It was a skill which would affect his life and the history of Switzerland in a way he would never have dreamed of. Meanwhile, in Austria, Albert I made his first move to crush the strength of the Swiss. He summoned an Austrian lord called Gessler to the palace. Now, Gessler was renowned for his cruelty, and the thought of his choice brought a twisted smile to the mouth of the emperor. You, Gessler, are a stroke of my genius.
Your Highness?
My dear Gessler, if the Swiss knew I was about to make you their governor, they would already be leaving their homes. I want you to do the thing you do best. Make life unbearable for other people.
Your Imperial Majesty,
You could hardly call these Swiss peasants people.
yeah, but whatever they are, they will submit or rebel, and the outcome will be the same. They will be crushed.
Unfortunately for the Swiss, Gessler was as good as his word. And in his castle on the banks of Lake Lucerne, he explained to his captain,
We will now take most of their livelihood and all of their freedom.
Soon, the happy and prosperous land had been turned into a sad and depressed arm of the Austrian Empire, where a smile was as rare as too much to eat. Year by year, the heads sank and the eyes were lowered to the ground, for fear of seeing in others what they felt themselves to be, a bowed and oppressed people. Yet still something remained inside the peasants which held them together, and it infuriated Gessler.
Don't these Swiss have any pride? The more I heap on them, the less they say. Yet still they carry on with their pitiful lives. They have obviously not yet reached their limit.
Contemptuous and angry, Gessler took himself on a grand tour of the three cantons, and wherever he saw any sign of wealth, he took it. And where there was any hint of progress, he stopped it.
You, there! What are you doing?
Building a house, your lordship.
Building a house? How can you afford to build a house?
Your lordship.
Oh! You have been hiding your profits in order to evade taxes. Demolish the house and throw him into prison.
Life went from bad to worse, as Gessler thought up new and more crippling laws and taxes. For Gessler, there had to be a rebellion to put down before he could feel that he had accomplished all that the emperor asked of him. In his small wooden house on the edge of the forest, William Tell had kept away from the worst effects of Gessler's rule. He had little to take, and rather than pay taxes on crops, he and his family lived on the game he could catch in the forest. He went to town less and less, for he couldn't bear the sight of his downtrodden countrymen. One cold autumn day, Gessler was out hunting when he broke out into uncontrollable laughter, which frightened even his own men.
Oh, dear, this is perfect. If they can take this, then there will be no need for a single soldier to keep them down. Back to the castle! I have had an inspiration! You Swiss, from the cantons of Uri, Schweiz, and Nidwalden, silence for the proclamation of Albert I, Emperor of Austria and King of Germany. It is hereby declared that the power and authority invested in the state are also invested in the symbols of the state. Therefore, as from today, a symbol of authority will be placed on the main square, to which you will all show due respect.
The captain began to laugh until he caught the steel shaft gaze in Gessler's eye.
The symbol will be a stake upon which will be placed Governor Gessler's hat, and all Swiss will bow as they pass. Those who fail to bow will be severely punished.
Gessler watched as the Swiss filed past the empty hat and bowed their heads, not out of respect, but fear. He watched with disappointment, for he had devised new punishments, each more cruel than the last, and without protesters, his inventions would go to waste. He caught his breath as a peasant passed by the hat, and neither he nor the young boy with him bowed.
You with the boy! Come here, you insolent peasant! Captain, bring them here! What's your name, peasant?
My name is William Tell. Gessler drew in his breath, for the Swiss stared straight back into his eyes as he spoke. Here, perhaps, was the last man in the cantons who would be a danger.
So, you are Tell, the famous archer, and you're full of insult for the Emperor.
I see no emperor here.
The hat, William Tell, is the Emperor. Now, go and bow to it.
I see no need. There is no emperor under it.
So, we have an insolent Swiss. The last insolent Swiss. Well, we shall have something very special for you. Let's see. I have it. That boy.
You mean my son?
Tell, your skill with the crossbow will either save you or punish you. I have heard that you can split an apple from 100 paces. Well, if you do, you can go free. But to make it more interesting for me, the apple shall sit on your son's head. So, should you miss, well, you take this chance, or you shall both die here and now.
William Tell thought first of escape, but the captain grabbed his son and the ring of soldiers pressed closer. Father, do it. I know you can. William Tell stared long and hard into his son's eyes, and he agreed. The soldiers handed back his crossbow and offered the quiver full of arrows. He took only 2, and tucking one inside his belt, he watched as a soldier paced out the 100 paces and placed an apple on his son's head. Gessler's eyes narrowed.
Try not to miss the apple, Tell.
The boy neither closed his eyes nor blinked as his father took aim, and the crowd hushed. He fired. The arrow split the apple in half, and the halves dropped either side of the boy. Gessler fumed and rode his horse furiously at William Tell.
So, Tell, you've been lucky this time.
But if you were so sure, why did you take 2 arrows? If I had hit my son, Gessler, the other bolt was for you.
Insolence! Insolence, Tell, of a different kind! I said I would not punish you if you succeeded. But this is a new offense, and for that you shall languish in my castle's dungeon for the rest of your life.
The crowd bubbled with anger at the sight of one of their countrymen standing up to the Austrian governor and being punished for it. Gessler became uneasy for the first time.
Disperse this rabble, and take Tell to the boat.
The peasants shouted and cursed as the soldiers bound William Tell and dragged him down to the boat on the edge of Lake Lucerne. The Austrian governor took one look at the angry crowd, jumped from his horse, ran after his men, and scrambled, panting, into the boat. In his haste to leave, Gessler failed to notice the thunderous black clouds that raced across the sky. Before they had got halfway across, the wind slashed at the surface of the lake. The ripples became waves, and the waves yawning troughs and peaks that swallowed and snatched at the small boat. The surface of the lake boiled. Panic seized the once brave soldiers, and they shouted to Gessler, who stared at the mountainous water as the storm whipped itself to fury. Governor, release Tell! He's a master boatman! Release him or we'll all go down! And the soldier's armor grew heavier at the thought of sinking. Gessler drew his dagger, leaned forward, seemed for a moment to want to plunge it into his prisoner, then cut his bonds. Cut, you cowards! Steer us to the shore, you hear? William Tell grabbed the rudder and turned the boat into the teeth of the storm. Row! You Austrian cowards, row! While white-faced, bulging-eyed Gessler clutched the sides of the small boat. Gradually, the boat twisted and bobbed its way to the grey, fractured, rocky shore. Suddenly, William Tell spun the tiller, turned the boat back towards the center of the lake, sprung onto the rocks, and kicked the boat away from the shore as he did so. He ran quickly to the edge of the forest, where he turned to see Gessler now exploding with anger and lashing out at his soldiers in the boat. The Swiss archer paused for a moment, and staring at Gessler, his hand fell to the arrow still in his belt, and he knew where one day it must bury itself. For days, William Tell moved through the forest, avoiding search parties, but making contact with his fellow countrymen. The anger of the Swiss was mounting, and defiance was beginning to show itself again. More and more men took to the forest with their weapons, and they looked to him for their leadership of the rebellion they knew must happen. Gessler, now seething with rage, led many searches for William Tell and his followers, until one day he heard a rumor that they could be found in a pass called Hollow Way, and he galloped a troop of soldiers there. The rumor had been started by Tell himself, and he lay in wait among the trees, clutching the second arrow he had taken in the square at Altdorf.
200 shillings for the man who takes Tell! Behind a tall pine, William Tell heard the offer echo through the forest. Calmly, he raised his crossbow, aimed, thought of the apple on his son's head, and fired. The arrow pierced Gessler's heart, and fearing ambush, his men fled. The signal had come, and the Swiss, bent in submission for years, raised their heads and weapons and shouted for freedom. The Austrians retreated to the castles, and the castles fell. They retreated to the cities, and the townspeople rose up. The Swiss had triumphed. Switzerland was free.